Adrienne Elrod, we have an updated look at the standings in the first contest of the 2020 Democratic presidential race. The Des Moines Register Mediacom CNN poll of the Iowa caucuses still has former Vice President Joe Biden in the lead, but his share of the vote has dropped 3 points since March to 24%. Senator Bernie Sanders is 8 points behind at 16%, down 9 points from March, while Senator Elizabeth Warren has jumped 6 points to 15%, and Mayor Pete Buttigieg got a 13-point bump from practically nothing in March to now take 14% of likely caucus goers. Senator Kamala Harris stayed put at 7%. Senator Amy Klobuchar and Beto O'Rourke each dropped to 2%. Meanwhile, 7 others hit 1% in the poll, which helped them as candidates continue to work to qualify for one of the first debates a little more than 2 weeks away. Adrienne, I think the Elizabeth Warren part of this poll might be the story, but also talk about those who aren't even on the list at this point. What happens to those campaigns?
Yeah, Mika, so a couple of observations about this poll. First of all, we're seeing that the top field of candidates, the top contenders, is starting to gel. Of course, that includes Biden, Sanders, Mayor Pete, Kamala Harris, and Elizabeth Warren. Secondly, as you noted, Sanders is losing support, and he's losing support to candidates like Elizabeth Warren and Mayor Pete Buttigieg, in part because they have policies that are on the same track record as his. But I think one of the problems that Bernie Sanders has, especially with more candidates in the field in terms of 2016, when it was just one other candidate, well, I guess 2 if you want to include Martin O'Malley, is that Bernie Sanders does not exactly have a track record in terms of getting the policies that he advocates for signed into law. So he's, been in Washington a long time. He's talked about income inequality. He's talked about breaking up the big banks, but he hasn't actually passed a lot of legislation that addresses these issues. So I think when you're looking at, voters are looking at the slate of candidates, they're saying, maybe I actually want somebody like Elizabeth Warren, who does have a track record of actually getting some of the policies that I support done. In terms of the rest of the field, a couple observations on that as well. Amy Klobuchar, this has got to be pretty disappointing to her. And again, it is early. We're still slightly less than 8 months away from the Iowa caucuses, but she's from a neighboring state, Minnesota, and she should be doing a little bit better in this poll. So the Iowa Hall of Fame event was this past weekend. Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker in part got a lot of accolades because they have strong grassroots supporters who showed up at a lot of these events, showed them a lot of support. So you can tell that there's a lot of work that's taking place behind the scenes that some of these campaigns are doing to actually create a stronger base that may not always be reflected in some of these polls. But this really leads up to the fact that the debates matter so much, Mika. Candidates will have a chance in a couple weeks to really show their stuff, for lack of a better term, and to try to create some sort of viral moment that will allow them to break out of the pack, especially these guys who are in the 1% to 2% range.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jonathan Lemire. My takeaway from the poll is this really does firm up the fact that we have now 2, even 3 tiers, and that top tier is now solidly occupied by Joe Biden, a slipping Bernie Sanders, a surging Mayor Pete, and a surging Elizabeth Warren, who I will say what we've been saying all along has seemed to be doing everything right so far.
That's exactly right. She has certainly caught fire a little bit here. She's having a moment, and it's that her idea of having a plan for, any number of things, for having detailed policy rolls out seemingly by the day, which is not many of her competitors are able to do that, has really connected. And she's also sort of improved rapidly as a retail politician, which is always sort of a knock on her. That wasn't a real strength. And she seems to be really connecting and resonating with audiences, particularly women. And we are seeing that also it's multiple tier race. And Joe Biden is certainly ahead, but his lead here is certainly smaller than it is in some of the national polls we've been seeing in recent weeks. And we know how much Iowa is going to matter. Yes, it's still 8 months out, but there's going to be real momentum coming from that one way or the other. Steve, question for you. You know the Democratic field and Democratic donor base and so on. Which campaigns here do you think? So there's some bold-faced names, governors, senators, the mayor of New York City, who don't even really register on that poll. The debate's going to be a flashpoint for certain. But coming out of that, we go into a few weeks and months, which campaigns are going to be in real trouble if they can't really start catching fire either in the polls or be able to raise money?
In terms of either Look, I think right now, the consensus among my little group in New York is that the people who they would most like to see win are those people on that second tier, sort of in the 1% level, for the most part. There's certainly some support for Mayor Pete and some support for all the candidates, but there's a disconnect between the people who the people in my world would like to see win and those who are actually likely to win. The debates, as we said, could be potentially transformational, but they might not be. They could be a non-event when you have 10 people on a stage, everybody gets 90 seconds, nobody can really break out. And as we said earlier, the campaign at the moment seems to be coalescing around 4 or 5 candidates at the top, some of whom, like Mayor Pete, enjoy a fair amount of support in New York. Others enjoy a good bit less of support in New York.
But Steve, let me ask you about timing. Everybody loves to talk about it's still too early, it's still too early. When you have 20 people, 21, 22 people in the field, it's not too early to be sitting at 1% and looking at all the people ahead of you going, geez, I'm just not going to be able to raise money at 1%. I'm not going to be able to raise money at 2%. If I can't raise money at 2%, I can't keep my campaign going over the next 8 months. When is too late for these 1%, 2% candidates to surge?
I think too late is going to be very soon, because you're going to see second quarter fundraising reports coming out soon. I think you're going to see dramatic drop-offs and very small amounts of money being raised by those candidates in the second tier. There is no real fundraising momentum behind them that I can see. People say it could take $30 million plus or minus to get to Iowa in reasonable shape, and it's going to become clear, I think, by the summer that for many of them that's just simply not going to happen, and they're going to disappear. And then the other sort of the thing that's been less paid attention to, but it's going to come up quickly, is from Iowa to Super Tuesday is something like 4 weeks. And on Super Tuesday, something like a total of 65% of the delegates will have been selected. And it includes California with 8 media markets. And you're going to have a ton of money really quickly to be able to compete in those primaries. And so I think you're going to see money winnowing out this field all by itself in relatively short order.
All right. Also, just on Elizabeth Warren, it's been fun to watch her sort of slowly climb up, because we've known her over the years, Joe. We know how much she loves this. She loves doing town halls. She loves connecting with people. You know, some people say what they say, but she doesn't give up. And she's so dogged and resilient, and as a teacher, she just doesn't give up on her students, and you see that happening on the campaign trail, where she just keeps going at it, and it appears to be paying off. Still ahead on Morning Joe, we've got some pointed op-eds to read, plus there's a new bipartisan push in Congress to stop the Trump administration from selling weapons to Saudi Arabia.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories, and you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.